Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. This Sunday, we get the wondrous blessing of encountering the question of whether you and I are faithful to the Lord. The law of the Sinai covenant necessitated that Israelites love and care for members of the covenant family. But the truth of the matter is, if we're strictly reading Leviticus, especially Leviticus 19:18, obligations of caring for people outside of the Levitical covenant, the Mosaic covenant, didn't exist, or at least they weren't imposed in that way. Yet, when we take a look at this Sunday's readings, David is going to show that his obedience to that command is one of the reasons why he was faithful in not killing Saul. Now, this was caring for Saul as a member of the covenant family. What David will also demonstrate throughout his life and his time in exile is that he carries similar regard for protection and for reverence for the life of those members who are outside of the covenant. And so God blesses David because David is known as a man after God's own heart, which means that while the letter of the law strictly calls for caring for the welfare of those members within the covenant family, David understood the spirit of the law because he understood the heart of the Lord. And so Saul was jealous of David. David enjoyed success and blessing in battle. David enjoyed a growth in popularity, and people grew to love him, and that grew to add to Saul's violent hatred of David, so much so that he vows to take David's life. And so in the psalm, which we attribute to David, David thanks God for his physical and spiritual blessings. And in the second reading, we go on to talk about how God is going to redeem the faithful. And then finally, that prepares us for the new covenant, where Jesus fulfills and transforms the old law of the Sinai covenant. And we talk about all of this in greater detail with my friend Rob Corzine of the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. And finally, in a recent interview, Vice President J.D. Vance, he invoked a principle that is little known outside of Catholic circles. It's called the Ordo Amoris. It simply means the order of loving, the order of love. And so critics of Vance have said Jesus' love is not ordered or ranked, but we examined this theology with Daniel Gordon and the veracity of that claim and how you and I can and ought to learn from it well. All this after the headlines.
Thank you, Marcus, and good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Friday, February 21st. It's the feast of St. Peter Damian. And today's news is brought to you by Visiting Angels, providing loving care and assistance for seniors in need at visitingangels.com. President Trump said he will not provide federal funding to states that don't comply to executive orders related to transgender women in sports. Speaking to governors at the White House, Trump had an exchange of words with Maine Governor Janet Mills on Friday over his executive order.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal law.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't.
Earlier this month, Trump signed an executive order that banned transgender women from participating in women's sports. Mills told Trump, "See you in court," to which he replied, "Good, I'll see you in court." The Republican-controlled Senate approved a $340 billion budget blueprint after pulling an all-nighter to get through all the amendments tacked onto a GOP proposal. The vote was 52-48 along party lines. The resolution includes funding for President Trump's border spending, immigration enforcement, and the military. And the Minnesota Senate is considering a bill that would ban the use of AI technology that can alter an image to make a person appear naked. The nudification legislation calls for a penalty of $500,000 for each unlawful access or download of these altered images. The Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee heard testimony today from people warning about the technology. A vote was not taken, and the measure could be included in a larger public safety bill. From the AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Dan McGraw.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. This Sunday's Gospel, we see Christ give us an expansive view of the law of love in the new and eternal covenant in Him. Joining us to unpack the readings of this Sunday and to realize deeper the covenant love of God our Father is my friend Rob Corzine, Vice President of Academic Programs for St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. Rob, really glad to be speaking with you. How are you?
I am doing wonderfully well. Thank you so much.
So, this weekend's gospel, not an easy task at all. Let's see what we have in store. Walk us through it, please.
All right. Well, let's start with the first reading. Mm-hmm. This is a rare Sunday for us. Many years we don't have the seventh Sunday of Ordinary Time because of how Lent usually falls. Mm-hmm. But the themes that unite these readings are the theme of one of the most difficult commands of our Lord, the theme of love for your enemies. Yeah. Which is always relevant and one of the most difficult forms of love to practice. But it's not just in the New; it's also in the Old Covenant. And so we have the story of Paul and Saul in 1 Samuel. So let's take a look. In those days, Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with 3,000 picked men of Israel to search for David in the desert of Ziph. Yeah. So David and Abishai went among Saul's soldiers by night and found Saul lying asleep within the barricade with his spear thrust into the ground at his head and Abner and his men sleeping around him. Abishai whispered to David, "God has delivered your enemy into your grasp this day. Let me nail him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I will not need a second thrust." But David said to Abishai, "Do not harm him, for who can lay hands on the Lord's anointed and remain unpunished?" So David took the spear and the water jug from their place at Saul's head, and they got away without anyone seeing or knowing or awakening. All remained asleep because the Lord had put them into a deep slumber. Going across to an opposite slope, David stood on a remote hilltop at a great distance from Abner, son of Ner, and the troops. He said, "Here is the king's spear. Let an attendant come over to get it. The Lord will reward each man for his justice and faithfulness. Today, though the Lord delivered you into my grasp, I would not harm the Lord's anointed." This is a brilliant episode, and it's not the only one of this kind in the story of David and Saul. Saul, yes, kept chasing David, no matter how much it was really clear that David was God's anointed. And this is interesting. In strict justice, David, I think, could have slain Saul. It was self-defense. David was God's anointed. So Saul had been removed. David had been anointed by the prophet. He could have executed justice as Abishai suggested. Right. But instead, not only does he exercise mercy rather than justice, but especially because of who Saul was. Like, who can lay hands on the Lord's anointed and remain unpunished? So he knew that Saul was occupying an office he didn't deserve, and that David had been anointed to take that office, but he's like, I'm not going to take it. That the Lord wants me to be king, the Lord will find a way to make me king, but it won't be because of a palace coup. It won't be because I assassinated the present king. And I think this is really important, for us to sort of look at that example. One of the most difficult kinds of enemies we face, and it's not necessarily for us, a king seeking to hunt us down, but what if your enemy is an authority figure, especially an authority figure within the kingdom of God? Right? This is the dilemma that the young David had to face. And so when Saul pursued him, David fled. But when the Lord, and it's explicit in the text, right? The Lord had delivered him into David's hands. Right. That I will not harm the Lord's anointed. This does a couple of things. It establishes in the kingdom of Israel this this principle of restraint. While all the kingdoms around, came and went with fair rapidity, David had established within Israelite tradition, we don't change the throne by means of assassination.
Right.
And that was one of the reasons why the Davidic dynasty lasted for a little over 400 years. It was literally unheard of for there to be political assassinations. But I think for us, this is a good understanding that when God puts someone in office, whether they be in the church, or you don't salute you salute the uniform, not the man. And we have the same situation with our spiritual fathers in the church. And we don't have to agree with our priests and with our bishops and with our Holy Father 100% of the time, but we have to honor them 100% of the time. This is the Council of Trent, right? Makes this part of the commandment to honor your fathers and mothers, to honor the various members of the hierarchy. But St. Josemaria holds up the example of Noah's righteous sons as a guide for our behavior towards priests. Noah's sons covered the nakedness of their father. Yeah. So St. Josemaria says, don't call attention to the failings of our fathers in the church, but present their best qualities. Well, there are limits to that, right? We don't become complicit in crimes. But it really is important, I think, and a factor, a practice that's missed often by our contemporaries in the church, especially sort of in online culture, who seem to be just often looking for failings to call out.
Right.
So we go to the responsorial psalm, and we see that this Davidic restraint is something that he sees God himself expressing. So bless the Lord, O my soul, and all my being bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. He pardons all your iniquities, heals all your ills, redeems your life from destruction, crowns you with kindness and compassion. Merciful and gracious is the Lord, slow to anger, abounding in kindness. Not according to our sins does he deal with us, nor does he requite us according to our crimes. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he put our transgressions from us. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. So David is here sort of expressing not just how he acts when he was not yet king, but shows that this is how our Lord deals with us, right? He doesn't give us the strict justice that he could, but pardons our iniquities, heals our ills, redeems our life from destruction, because he is slow to anger and abounding in kindness. So David, I think, is described as a man after God's own heart, and this is an instance of that. And for us, we live after the Sermon on the Mount, where this is not just a recommended practice anymore. Mm-hmm. Jesus is like, if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you your trespasses. Maybe the hardest form of this that I've heard is Dorothy Day, who famously would just cut through all of the blah, blah, blah and get right to the heart of things. And, Dorothy Day says, you love God. If you want to know how much you love God, here's the answer. You love God as much as you love the greatest of your enemies. Like, you can love your friends for different reasons. You can love your family for different reasons, but you love God just as much as you love the greatest of your enemies.
Right.
That has to change the way we think about those who oppose us.
That's a very loving slap in the face to us.
Yeah.
I'm continuing this conversation with Rob Corzine, Vice President of Academic Programs for the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. We are talking about the law of love that we are encountering this Sunday, and you and I love God as much as we love our worst enemy. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
When your children consider going to college, where are you going to find a place that will prepare them for the future and build on the foundation that you've laid? The answer? Ave Maria University. With an authentically Catholic curriculum including 35 majors, AMU prepares students to take on the world.
I've seen the difference in my son since he's been at Ave Maria. He's happy, he's excited about what he's going to do with his degree, and he's living his faith.
Learn more at avemaria.edu. That's avemaria.edu.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Have you ever been so grief-stricken and so heart-sick that you can't see God? You can't see God in the tragedy. You can't see God in that cross. You can't see God in that sick. Why? You're enveloped in that grief. You're enveloped in fear. And God is out the window. You don't see Him standing right next to you.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
CMF Curo is a Catholic healthcare ministry providing families nationwide with a better solution centered around whole health, spirit, mind, and body. Our members share their medical burdens within a faith-filled community. At CMF Curo, our members have access to a spiritual director, concierge services, and other health and spiritual resources. Find out if CMF Curo is a better solution for your family. Visit mycatholichealthcare.com. That's mycatholichealthcare.com.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Rob Corzine, Vice President of Academic Programs for the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, and we are talking about the law of love as will be seen in this Sunday's Gospel and as the first reading and the responsorial psalm call us to. So, Rob, I butchered the quote at the end of the last segment. I know I didn't say it accurately, but it's tremendously sobering, and I'd like to ask if you could open this segment by just re-evoking that quote and then moving forward.
Yeah, Dorothy Day, sort of cutting through a lot of our sort of theological blah, 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 just gets to the heart of it when she says, if you want to know how much you love God as much as you love your worst enemy. And that is, I think, I think we could show that's a direct consequence of taking seriously today's gospel.
Yeah.
Jesus says to his disciples, this is in Luke 6. I think we can, for time's sake, should probably do this and skip over the second reading, which is just our continuation of 1 Corinthians. It's lovely, but it's a thick piece of Pauline theology. So let's go straight to the gospel. Jesus says to his disciples, "To you who hear, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. And from the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold even your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from the one who takes what is yours, do not demand it back. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. For if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. If you lend money to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners and get back the same amount. But rather love your enemies and do good to them, and lend expecting nothing back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Stop judging, and you will not be judged. Stop condemning, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and gifts will be given to you. Good measure, packed down, shaken together, and overflowing, will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will be in turn measured out to you. This is incredibly profound. There's so much here. But I think that, that difficult saying of Dorothy Sayers, Dorothy Day, is really sort of vindicated here. That you don't love your enemies because they're lovable. You don't love your enemies because you expect to get something from them. You're not going to.
Yes.
You don't love your enemies because you're necessarily afraid of them. The only reason to love your enemies is because of this commandment of Jesus and because you're imitating God who does so. So with all of the other people that you easily love, or sometimes with difficulty, you're the only reason to love your enemies is because of love of God. And so it is the measure of your love of God, how well you love your enemies. So that's a hard saying. I think the really hopeful saying in here is there at the back. Stop judging that you will not be judged. Stop condemning and you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. In some ways, we get to, by our behavior toward people who wrong us, we get to create the standard we'll be judged by God on. Mm-hmm. For the measure with which you measure will in turn be measured out to you. If I, for the tiny slights and for the finite wrongs that people do me, can mete out mercy rather than justice, can, seek understanding and give forgiveness, that affects the way that God Most High will deal with my ugly sins. Right. That is just purely from a cost-benefit analysis point of view, that's a good deal.
That's a good way to present it, and it also therefore presents us with the sound moral corrective, which is God is not saying don't judge the evil of the sin that's been committed, because He doesn't want us to emulate that behavior, but He's telling us no, that person is still worthy of love, and so that person is demanding of our honor for the one reason that Christ has called us to honor them.
That's right. I mean, we can see the sin of the person and say that's sin, but we can't see the soul of the person and know the degree of their culpability for it. The only person that we have even some insight into is ourselves. And so wisdom says, be kind and generous with others' sins, be strict with yourself.
Right.
And basic human wisdom, right? If we do that, we'll do justice. But what our Lord is calling us to here is not just a sort of strict justice that is seeking to never blame someone more than they're deserving. But if we really knew their desert, we could blame them. It says, we want to practice a godlike mercy. We want to be the description of us what the psalmist gives as the description of the Lord, right? Merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, not according to our sins, nor does He requite us according to our crimes. So, and it's not that God doesn't have a perfect bead on our sins and our crimes, but it is His nature to have mercy and compassion.
Right.
And we have, as Catholics, through our baptism and our confirmation, been given that spirit, and we need to lean into it, and we need to cooperate with those graces and imitate our Lord. First, because He commands it, but then second, in that last bit, because it's a really good deal for us.
Okay, so
mercy.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Mercy is obligatory and beneficial.
So let's talk spiritual practicality here. Undoubtedly, our listeners are listening, and none of us are really masters at forgiving. But what's a practical way we can get over the hurdle of unforgiveness? I think many people try and don't quite see how to get over it.
I think often the thing that we're trying to do is feel better about the person. In the same way, a lot of people, spend a lot of time trying to feel forgiven, rather than just giving their sins to God and trusting that you are.
Right.
And so we don't need to struggle somehow with our emotions to get ourselves to feel good about our enemy. We just need to surrender any claim that we have, right? So I forgive you doesn't mean I trust you anymore. It doesn't mean like you're now my favorite person. It means whatever claim against you that your sin against me gave me, I renounce that claim. I don't need any payback. I don't need any, I have no enmity towards you. I don't want bad things to happen to you. I don't even need my own back from you. I renounce that claim. And it's incredibly freeing. It's, unforgiveness, as I think it was Gandhi, is an acid that harms the vessel it's contained in, more than its object. And so again, there's both a divine commandment and a certain wisdom in forgiveness. But it's very difficult, but it's not as difficult, I think, as we sometimes make it when we're trying to feel forgiving, rather than just objectively say, I no longer have a claim on you.
Right. Rob, thank you very much. That was both biblically beneficial, but also spiritually edifying. Thank you for making the time.
God bless, my pleasure.
Rob Corzine, Vice President of Academic Programs for the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. We've been talking about this weekend's readings. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at avemaria.com. That's avemaria.com.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
The Catholic Church teaches that Jesus Christ is literally and wholly present, body and blood, soul and divinity, under the appearances of bread and wine. St. John the Apostle records the John chapter 6 Bread of Life discourse, in which Jesus states that his flesh is true food and his blood true drink. Who better to understand John's writings and subsequent teachings than a disciple and student of John, St. Ignatius of Antioch? In his letter to the Smyrnians in 110 AD, Ignatius writes, I have no taste for corruptible food, nor for the pleasures of this life. I desire the bread of God, which is the flesh of Jesus Christ. And for drink, I desire his blood, which is love incorruptible. The Catholic Church absolutely follows St. John and St. Ignatius in taking Jesus at his word. Examining the truths of the Catholic faith, this is faithforensics.org.
Christ is the answer, with Father John Riccardo.
John 14. This is Jesus in the upper room with the disciples before he's going out to his sacrifice of himself for our salvation. And Philip says to the Lord, "Show us the Father, and we'll be satisfied." Jesus looks at Philip and says, "Philip, have I been with you all this time? Don't you understand? When you see me, you're looking at the Father." In fact, only two people throughout human history have given rise to the question, not who is he, but what is he? The two people are Buddha and Jesus. Buddha's answer was, don't come to me, don't look to me, look to my doctrine, look to what I teach. Jesus' answer was, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart. Jesus is explicitly claiming to be God.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. In a recent interview, Vice President J.D. Vance invoked a principle. It's little known outside of Catholic circles. It's called the Ordo Amoris, or the order of love, or rightly ordered love. His critics have said that Jesus' love is not ordered or ranked, and so we examine the theology of the Ordo Amoris with Daniel Gordon. Daniel is Assistant Professor of Theology at Ave Maria University. Daniel, I'm very glad to have you join us. How are you?
Delighted to be here, Marcus. Thanks so much for having me.
I think you and I have our interactions largely limited to connections on social media, so I'm really glad to be able to touch base theologically this way. And
likewise, and such a rich topic for us to talk about today.
I know, and as fellow Thomists, lovers of the wisdom of St. Thomas Aquinas, I have to say the fact that this has been invoked in the public sphere with very little understanding. It's so demonstrative of how far we've fallen from a notion of scholastic principles undergirding societal thinking.
Yeah, I think that's right. And even where people are talking about, right, the kerfuffle between J.D. Vance and Rory Stewart, and then you know, surprisingly, Pope Francis weighing in on this. Even in many of those articles, there's little attempt to really understand the principles of the principle, right, and Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. So I think you're right on that point.
So let's talk about the principle. I'm primarily looking at the Secunda Pars, but obviously in the City of God, Augustine appeals to it as well. Let's regain a proper understanding of what the Ordo Amoris really is.
Sure, yeah. So I think, you mentioned Aquinas and Augustine. I think those are two great points in the tradition where we can think about the Ordo Amoris. Augustine talks about it in a few places. You mentioned the City of God. I think also in the De Doctrina Christiana and in the Confessions. In the De Doctrina Christiana, he provides a really kind of simple version of the principle where he says, and I have a little quotation here, he says, all people should be loved equally, but you cannot do good to all people equally. So you should take particular thought for those who, as if by chance, happen to be particularly close to you in terms of place, time, or any other circumstances. So he makes this interesting distinction. We should love all equally, right? But we can't do good to all equally. So Aquinas picks up on this distinction, the Secunda Secundae. He, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but he makes a distinction between benevolencia and beneficencia. So our benevolence towards others, our goodwill towards others should be equal, right? We should all desire equally the salvation of all men from a kind of theological perspective, and also their natural happiness, just from a purely philosophical or secular perspective. but we can't do good to everybody, right? Because we're not God. Right? whether you're thinking about things on an individual level or on a national level, I mean, some individuals are going to be able to do much more good than others.
Mm-hmm.
Some nations are going to be able to do much more good than others on an international scale, but nobody can do everything. So it's how do you approach the all of the needs that are out there? Well, Augustine says, I think what's behind this principle is a trust in divine providence.
Mm-hmm.
That God places us. He arranges things and arranges human relationships in such a way that others who are close to us in time or space, or by reason of familial affinity,
right,
or national affinity, that we're meant to take care of those people in a kind of privileged way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that we shouldn't care about others, right? It's not that we shouldn't try to reach out to people further afield. It's just that's kind of our first responsibility.
Right.
And I think there's something in Catholic social teaching, the principle also of subsidiarity. I mean, you have these two principles, subsidiarity and solidarity, which says that on the one hand, we should have a kind of solidarity with all those who are suffering injustice, to make, in some sense, their cause our own.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we have to respect the fact that no one person, no one group, no one individual can do everything.
Yep.
And that action should be reserved to, I don't want to say to the group that can most efficiently do it, but to the group or to the community that's tasked with responding to that particular need.
Right.
So there's a lot to talk about, but the basic principle with Augustine is that we should love first those who God has placed in our path.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the principle behind that is divine providence.
Right.
That we can trust in divine providence, that God has placed those who are nearer to us and given us a kind of obligation to take care of their needs first.
So just to expand the thought a little more and to draw from Aquinas in, as I mentioned earlier, the Secundus Pass, this order of charity has its basis in the exercise of reason, to be sure. Right. So that means that there's an appeal here to the rational faculty. There's an appeal even to natural law, a kind of natural ordering. And so when you think about, for example, married couples, bride and bridegroom have covenantally vowed themselves to each other. And so by virtue of that, in the sacramental covenantal order, they have an obligation. And so there is this language of natural and sacramental obligation. And so elected officials, for example, they have an obligation by virtue of the vows they swear to enter into office by means of oath. And so that means that just within the exercise of logical reason, we can see that there is a hierarchy to the good that we can do that Augustine appeals to. And as Aquinas rightly says, because all these things, when done rightly, is ordered ultimately to the highest common good, who is God, who is the greatest common good of all man. Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's very well put. And I like the analogy, too, between, well, the emphasis you're laying on vows, right? That husband and wife swear a vow to one another. Politicians, presidents, soldiers also take an oath, right? An oath of office, which is a kind of vow to uphold the common good. So much of our society is just based on a contractual understanding of relationship, and to kind of recover this idea of a culture of vows is important. So we do, we take vows to one another in marriage. Right, I don't know how quickly we want to jump into politics. But the president is also taking a vow, to uphold the Constitution, the common good of the nation, and that obviously is going to have an important relationship to the common good of the entire human community. Right. But I think his first responsibility, whether he's a Democrat or Republican, is to the common good of the nation.
Yep.
And then there's a very particular, it's a prudential question, an extremely important prudential question, is then to what extent can we direct those resources to help those beyond our borders who are facing, situations of grave injustice.
Right.
And that's where you have the principles that Augustine and Aquinas lay out, but then you have this very difficult political question, a very particular political question, right? Circumscribed by a particular time and place, the resources available to us on this very, difficult question of immigration. It's interesting how, you said at the beginning of our conversation, it's interesting how this has become such a public question between J.D. Vance, Pope Francis, and a whole host of Catholic commentators. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
Oh, me too. And we are continuing this conversation on the other side of the break with Daniel Gordon, Assistant Professor of Theology at the excellent Ave Maria University. And we're talking about the Ordo Amoris, how we as Catholics ought to rightly understand it and apply it in our own life and in the political sphere. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
When your children consider going to college, where are you going to find a place that will prepare them for the future and build on the foundation that you've laid? The answer? Ave Maria University. With an authentically Catholic curriculum, including 35 majors, AMU prepares students to take on the world.
My daughter told me she was published in a scientific journal as an undergrad. I'm so proud of her. The world needs Catholic physicists, and my daughter's going to be one of them.
Learn more at avemaria.edu. That's avemaria.edu.
Hello, Steve Ray here. We're going to Normandy, France in November to celebrate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. We'll also be in Paris for the opening of the resurrected Notre Dame Cathedral. Join us on a pilgrimage of discovery through the saints and shrines of France. Catherine Le Bourrier and the Miraculous Medal, St. Therese of Lisieux, the incorrupt body of Vincent de Paul, a dinner cruise through Paris on the Seine River, and so much more.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at avemariaradio.net. Italy aficionado Teresa Tomio's newest book is now out on the Ave Maria online store. In Italy's Shrines and Wonders, Teresa Tomio provides how best to navigate the most popular sites, best routes, and how to best to soak in all the beauty Italy has to offer. She also shares the most inspiring journeys to make your Italy excursion utterly unforgettable. Italy's Shrines and Wonders from Catholic Connections Teresa Tomio can be purchased at avemariaradio.net.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
Living the Beatitudes with Father Bjorn.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The virtue of purity and holy chastity is certainly a very important thing, but I think we can misunderstand this beatitude. As human beings in our fallen state, we tend to love things and use people, but we're meant to use things and love people. We can manipulate in relationships, and we can try to control other people, and we can focus on other people as objects. But to be pure in heart is to be in love, and ultimately to be pure in heart and to be happy is to be in love with God himself as well. This beatitude calls us to have a focus on being open to choosing God, choosing life, to choose love. If God is not the ultimate end of our desires and our hopes and dreams, we will be the saddest of people. Let's say yes to God and choose his way, be focused on his love and pure in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
For more about the Beatitudes, visit EWTNRC.com.
What constitutes hope? The Catholic Catechism tells us when God fully reveals himself and calls man, man cannot respond on his own. He must hope that God will give him the capacity to love and respond and act in conformity with the commandment of charity. Hope confidently expects divine blessing and the beatific vision of God while fearing to offend him and incur punishment. Despair is a sin against hope, because when a man despairs, he ceases to hope for his eternal salvation, which denies God's goodness, justice, and mercy. The sin of presumption, on the other hand, assumes God will give you forgiveness without conversion and glory without merit, or presumes that man can win his salvation with no supernatural assistance. This is Peggy Stanton, and this has been the Order of Malta's Minute with the Catechism.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Dr. Daniel Gordon, Assistant Professor of Theology at Ave Maria University, and we're talking about the Ordo Amoris that has made public conversations lately because J.D. Vance appealed to the principal in an interview on TV. And so, Daniel, we were talking earlier, like you mentioned, so yes, we can acknowledge that we are in a messy situation in this very, very unique time in modern history. But we can also acknowledge that there are certain objective truths about the matter. Number one, no matter who tries to... I've lived in 7 countries before. Well, this is the 7th country I've lived in. And, and I can be very honest that the United States has, in the countries I've lived in at least, and the other countries I know about, it has the most generous immigration policies in the world that I've experienced. It's actually not as strict as some of the other nations I've lived in, and some were third world nations.
Very interesting.
Number two, every nation, this is an objective truth, the church holds this as well as natural law, every nation possesses the right to uphold the jurisprudence of the governance of its borders. And so the enforcement of law is well within the purview of the exercise of charity of elected officials. And none of that ought to be even a matter of debate. The question then becomes how much, the question then becomes, are we first adhering to the charity that's owed to the citizenry before we start talking about the pseudo-charity that we're claiming for the honoring of what is essentially the violation of national law, civil law?
Right. I think that's right, and I think something else, it's not even simply a question of American citizens versus the citizens of other countries, but there's also just the very difficult question of determining, okay, if we are going to allow immigration, which on the whole, to some extent, seems to be like a healthy thing for the United States, who is that going to be open to? And then how do you make those determinations? How do you uphold those policies? How do you also protect the security of the nation? And I think in the heat of the political debate, it's become this kind of all or nothing. It feels like it's become this kind of all or nothing issue where it's like either borders are totally open or they're totally closed, and obviously it has to be something in between those two. I think the analogy that some people use, I think, is helpful, is that we need to have high walls, but also broad gates. High walls, but also broad gates. That you should have people who are in fleeing political persecution in very difficult circumstances. I think that there's a very strong legal and philosophical case to be made that those people should be able to immigrate, but then also that the country needs to be properly secured and defended. And it's interesting that Pope Francis, in his letter to American bishops, acknowledges this point.
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of has been interpreted as seeing a veiled correction of J.D. Vance, right? That he says, quote, "The true Ordo Amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan, on the love that builds a fraternity open to all," end quote. But then he also says, almost immediately after that, at the same time, one must recognize the right of a nation to defend itself and keep communities safe from those who have committed violent or serious crimes while in the country or prior to arrival, right? So I mean, even the Pope is I shouldn't say even the Pope, but I mean the Pope is giving us both sides of the principle here too.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this difficult particular prudential political question is how do you instantiate those principles in a particular time and place?
Right.
And that's something that, right, Catholics of good conscience and all persons of goodwill can disagree about, to be perfect, to be frank, and hopefully can have an open dialogue and conversation about it in a way that's going to be ordered towards the common good of the country.
Right.
I did want to say one other point while we're talking about the order of love. I mean, we've talked about it in Augustine and Aquinas as in the simplest sense as loving those who are nearer to you. That's what the Ordo Amoris is. But before we went to the break, you also mentioned the question of how do we apply this to our own lives as well. And I thought that was a really good question, because Augustine also talks about virtue as the right ordering of our loves. So the Ordo Amoris refers both to who we love, but then also the virtues that we practice. That virtue is the order of love. So he says that we should love, we need to love the right thing, right? To love what we ought to love, and not to love what we ought not love. And the thing that we ought to love, we should love in the right measure, right? Neither more nor less. So I just wanted to draw attention to that this phrase, the order of love, in Augustine and Aquinas, there are several ways you can think about it in terms of their writings. It's not just who we love in terms of those who are close to us, but for Augustine, it encapsulates the entirety, I think, of the moral life.
Right.
The virtues are really modalities of love.
Right. And when you consider these modalities of love, the question of obligation, covenantal, sacramental, they come into play. So as you and I were talking about earlier, when we talk about the applied reality of the Ordo Amoris, a husband, from the moment he professes his vows to his bride, has sworn a covenantal vow and oath before the Lord and the assembly that he will, and if it's sacramental, he will love the Lord, and then he's going to honor this sacramental marriage over and above his own personal interests. And then the children that come forth will have a claim to his selflessness, to his love. And it's only after fulfilling those that he then can say, I have an obligation to give of whatever I have left. Because like you mentioned, there's a limitation to the good that we can will because we are finite creatures.
Right. Right, I think that's exactly right. There's only so much that we can do, right? And part of that is the finitude of being a creature.
Right.
The acknowledgement that we're not God, or an acknowledgement that we can't do everything. We can actually do very little, perhaps more than we think we can. And that I think that behind the doctrine of the order of love is a trust in divine providence, that God has placed us in a particular time and a place and among particular people. For a certain reason, and that we can't do everything, but we can do good to those who are near to us. And that's an interesting point about the parable of the Good Samaritan and love of neighbor. The neighbor is really the one who is near to you, right? Who is the one who is near to me? Part of the parable of the Good Samaritan is not that the Samaritan is kind of going off in search for people to help, right? But he's sort of just minding his own business. He's walking down the road, but he sees somebody in need, right? It's the very fact that he stumbles upon somebody who's directly in his path and goes out of his way to take care of him. That makes that parable so interesting.
Right.
It's that it's literally the person in front of him that he's taking care of.
Right.
As he goes about his business. But then when he does find somebody in need in front of him, he offers this extraordinary charity and generosity. So that's another aspect that I think, zooming out of the whole political, theological, ecclesial questions to how does this principle apply to my own life, I think that is a helpful parable to reflect on.
Right. And as we
And
consider...
we think,
go ahead.
Yeah. If we can think, too, I would just add one kind of caveat or gloss to that. Right, who is the person in need? The person in need might be the person in our family, right? It might be one of our friends. It need not be a stranger. It could be somebody living under our own roof.
Right.
And oftentimes is. So I would just add that as well.
Right. And as we consider a prudential exercise of the order of charity, and we consider within the order of reason what is right, proximity means preserving that which is owed to the common good. And like you mentioned, just returning this conversation to J.D. Vance and the presidency, elected officials, citizens owe a right to the common good of the nation that they are in. And as we exercise that prudential judgment well, may we discern what's best for the dignity of human persons within nations and without. So just as a closing thought, Daniel, I want to ask you to just give us an exhortation as we move forward in terms of reclaiming right reason in discerning charity.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent question, something to think about. What is the relationship between reason and charity? Charity, right, love of God for the sake of God, is understood in Thomas Aquinas as a kind of friendship with God that then extends to his creatures, right, to our fellow human beings. But it's in the midst of our families, it's in the midst of our friendships, it's in the midst of, right, the people that we're driving down the road with on the highway and standing in line with to get groceries, to exercise patience and charity there as well.
Right.
And sometimes it might just look like civility. I suppose, though, we can also pray for the people that we come across. We can offer them a smile. We can offer them a helping hand. Honestly, sometimes it's just those small things that really make the biggest difference.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Always a joy to connect with someone from Ave Maria University.
Thanks so much, Marcus.
My guest, Dr. Daniel Gordon, Assistant Professor of Theology at Ave Maria University, and we have been talking about the Ordo Amoris, the order of charity, and the exercise of reason that necessitates the prudential judgment of charity. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.